I both need answers. I need to know everything, so hopefully he learns the truth soon, because then Dad is going to have a lot of explaining to do. It just makes me even more desperate to learn about Ishin's backstory. Selfishly. Ichigo, shut your mouth, because I want to hear everything now. Please, I beg you, just tell me Ishin's backstory. And for now, Kubo's just taunting me, dangling it over my head. And that's fine. That's totally cool. We've got more pressing matters to focus on. But eventually, I need that backstory. It happened. It finally happened. I'm honestly a little surprised that I can even talk about this now that I finally know about something that I've waited for so long, that I have so many answers to so many questions that have orbited around me throughout the whole story of Bleach, and that Kubo finally let me in on a lot of the secrets that he's been keeping for so long. It's surreal for me right now. To say that I've wanted to know the backstory of Isshin Kurosaki is kind of a massive understatement. For well over a year now, I have been dying to hear about Ishin's past, and I have made no secret about how much I kept wanting that. Pretty much any time that Isshin has shown up since revealing that he was a Soul Reaper, I was hoping that he would give us something, and he usually didn't at all. Like, nothing. And even opportunities when we could have, we didn't. It's been a long journey of waiting for this moment. I know it was probably even longer for most of you, because this story came years after, right? You know, I've only been doing this for like a couple years now, and it's only been like a year and a half since I learned about Isshin. But for you guys, it was even longer, so I can't even imagine. Okay, I can't even imagine. But all I can speak toward is my own personal desire to see this actually be explained and to get some actual answers. And I was so desperate to hear those, and it was a grueling wait. You all saw it, you all heard it. I've waited so long for this. Isshin being a Soul Reaper was absolutely the mystery that I was most curious about from the moment we learned that that's what he was, because that reveal back then just brought with it so many questions. Like, why did he give up his powers? Why was he living on Earth? How did he meet Ichigo's mom? Did other Soul Reapers we know him well back then? Do they know he's Ichigo's dad? What squad was he part of? Did he run away? Was he banished? Is this why Ichigo could see ghosts and is so powerful? What's his relationship with Urahara? Why didn't he help Ichigo earlier than he did? Why did he get his powers back when he did? Those are just a few of the first questions that came to mind once Kubo dropped the daddy of all bombs on me when he was kicking off the Arankar arc. And he dropped it while having Isshin kill my precious anglerfish hamster, the Grand Fisher, thematically tying Ishin's return with the death of his wife by getting that bit of revenge against the Hollow that killed her. His first act as a Soul Reaper again was killing the Grand Fisher, and it didn't seem like at the time that he was really seeking that out. It just so happened that that's what happened, and so it was more of a thematic revenge, a fitting thing for us, the readers, where Isshin didn't seem to really hold a grudge against the Grand Fisher, and we'll get back into that in a bit. But it mostly seemed designed to remind us of Masaki when it happened that way, just subtly hinting that Isshin being a Soul Reaper and what happened in the past would be very centered on his wife. And sure enough, it is. It's been this massive mystery that I've just been waiting for answers for, but I think that's only helped to build the anticipation. It really feels like Kubo was very careful with giving us his past, because there have been opportunities to reveal it. Hell, in story, Isshin was about to tell Ichigo before Ichigo told him he didn't have to until he was ready. Kubo was just dangling the answers to his past right in front of me, taunting me with it, but the wait is over. And now, after these chapters and episodes, Bleach has finally given me everything. Well, everything but the rain. The title of this flashback sequence is intriguing on its own, and obviously harkens back to the Memories in the Rain arc that made me fall in love with Bleach in the first place, and that was the reason that this channel even exists. That story meant so much to me, and it made me really invested in Ichigo and this story. So it just felt so satisfying to be linked to that story in particular, because it was reinforcing the things that that story talked about, the things that I loved, the things that hit me really personally. And I didn't even know that I needed more of that story, that there was more to it until very recently, and it really delivered on that, on being a follow-up to a lot of the things brought up way back. Like, what was it, 500 chapters ago? 400 chapters ago? Way back in the beginning, at the very start of my channel. And it carried over a lot of those same emotions that I felt way back then. There was technically already a Memories in the Rain 2, which was the flashback pertaining to Kaien and Rukia, which had its own thematic links to Memories in the Rain, but it was more of a spiritual sequel, a way to show how a rainy day in the past changed Rukia's life, much like a rainy day changed Ichigo's, showing a shared trauma, a shared feeling of loss that those two characters shared that kind of brings them close together and made them who they were. But this story is more of a direct successor, I would say, since it directly ties into Misaki Kurosaki and the reasons for her eventual death on June 17th of that year, expanding on it in so many ways, so much later in the story. Memories in the Rain meant so much to me. It's the reason we're here, it's the reason I'm talking about this. And it raised questions that I didn't even know were being raised back then. But through the events that have happened in between then and now, in retrospect, Kubo has been building off of Memories in the Rain since then. All these hundreds of chapters later, slowly introducing elements that brought more and more questions surrounding what we learned back then, surrounding Masaki's death. We learn Ichigo's dad was a Soul Reaper. We learn Masaki was a Quincy. And suddenly it's like, you look back on that, on Ichigo's origin, essentially, and you go, that's weird. And suddenly you're thinking there was more to that. There was more to that day all that time ago. There had to be. There had to be. Why didn't Ichigo's dad protect her if he was a Soul Reaper? And then why didn't Misaki protect herself if she was a Quincy? And we get those answers. We get those answers, but we'll get to it. This is going to be a long video because I got a lot to say about this, because this was long awaited and so satisfying to finally get here, and now I can finally talk about it. Last note about the title, Everything But the Rain. Besides what it's intentionally trying to invoke from the history of this series, as far as the feelings of rain and the previous chapters that were titled Using Rain, I interpret the title like this. The everything that it's referring to is all of the answers to questions that have been plaguing Ichigo, that have left his origin in a vague and mysterious place, the same questions that I've had as a reader. That's the everything. I've talked at length about the rain and what it represents in Bleach as far as Ichigo's pain and trauma and struggles, so I think it's saying that this story will tell you everything about Ichigo's past. It'll give you the context, but it won't be able to give answers for the quote-unquote rain. All of this knowledge will be good to have, but still won't be enough to fully mend Ichigo's sadness, his turmoil, his trauma. We'll know why it happened, but knowing this won't fix what's happened. The answers and the history aren't enough to fully bring back those sunny days, because the horrors that came with the rain still happened. We can learn about the context, we can learn more about it, but that all still happened. That's my interpretation of Everything But the Rain. We're getting a lot, but we still don't have justification or good reason for why Ichigo had to feel all of this, why his life had to go this way. The unfairness of what the rain brings to his life. We won't get a good reason why this had to happen to him, but we will understand why it happened. Yeah, that's my thought on this very interesting title. Or hey, maybe it's called this because we never learn why that black hollow only attacks in the rain. At least I don't think we did. Did we? So we learn everything except What's up with that rain, and why does the hollow only attack there? That's another explanation we can go with, I guess. I loved the lead up to this story. For something that's been so awaited and that Kubo has held off on for so long, it really needed to feel like the perfect time to finally tell this. Like I've said, there were times when we could have heard all of this, but narratively, it was only going to hit hardest when Ichigo was at a point where he needed to know the whole truth. And Misaki being revealed to be a Quincy, along with Ichigo's training being halted because he didn't know his past, were the perfect things to bring him to this point. His future hinges on understanding his past, on understanding this new revelation, and understanding himself, and accepting where he comes from, and he can't do any of that without hearing the whole series of unfortunate events. Isshin going to tell Ichigo the way that he did, unseen by bystanders, was so good because it brings it back to the grace that Ichigo gave him when he first found out his dad was a Soul Reaper. He was obviously curious, how could he not be, but he wanted Isshin to tell him the whole story on his own terms, when he was ready to. He didn't need to give him that opportunity, but he did, and as much as it meant that he and I needed to wait longer, it allowed Isshin to be the one to initiate it, and that was important. This is his story to tell, and I was seeded when I realized that Isshin was finally going to tell it. These chapters take us back to the past, where we finally get to see Isshin Isshin Shiba, back when he was in his prime as a Soul Reaper, and it didn't let me down in that regard whatsoever. Given the shoulder robe he always has on him in the present, I assumed he was a captain of some kind, but we learn he was the captain of Squad 10 specifically. So my theories about him being part of Squad 0 went out the window pretty fast, but it was a fun theory while it lasted, right? It was plausible. The association with Squad 10 in particular was unexpected for me. I never imagined that Hitsugaya and Rangiku, of all people, knew Isshin so well, but it turns out they did, as they were seeded members of his squad. His respective relationships with them were fun, but yeah, it's interesting how they were kind of natural allies to Ichigo all of these years later. Maybe they recognized a bit of their old captain in him, even if they didn't know the full truth. Maybe they subconsciously just liked Ichigo or felt comfortable around Ichigo. But it's crazy that in the Arankar arc, when the two of them were hanging around Karakura Town and Ichigo's school and Orihime's place, Rangiku and Hitsugaya were so close to their former captain. Wild. As for Isshin, he's kind of exactly what you'd expect him to have been back then, despite his high position. He's a lot like Ichigo and Kaien. Pretty casual and funny and good-natured, but willing to get serious when it comes to protecting people. You can very clearly see the foundation for the man that we know and love in the future. Still, I would have loved to have seen some of his relationships with different captains, or maybe some time with the rest of the Shiba clan, but this flashback wasn't giving us a day in the life of Isshin Shiba, it was telling a very specific part of his life, and kept the focus where it needed to be. Kubo isn't spending any of his page time on little side tangents, because he obviously recognizes that the main goal of these chapters needs to be giving long-awaited context. Plus, given how similar Isshin is in his temperament to Ichigo or Kaien, we can kind of use them to gauge how he got along with some of the other Soul Reapers. Like, I'm sure Byakuya wasn't a big fan of Isshin back then, We are very quickly presented with a bit of a mystery. Soul Reapers stationed in the living world are disappearing on rainy nights, and Isshin jumps at the chance to investigate, leaving his subordinates behind. And I have to wonder how different things would have been if they tagged along with him. There's a chance that these two would have been killed, and Rangiku dying in particular might have set off a whole chain of differences, since you'd be removing Gin's whole reason for so many of his actions. Like, how would things have been if Rangiku died here? Would Gin have continued carrying on his ruse with Aizen? Would he have just tried to make a move immediately? It's hard to say. Maybe he would have done the exact same thing. I don't know. It could have changed things. In the living world, we get to meet Ichigo's future mother, Masaki Kurosaki, when she's a teenager, and she's in a pretty surprising situation back then, living with the Ishida family because her family are all dead. However, she's only been allowed to stay because she's a pureblood Quincy and is apparently expected to marry Ryukin one day for the sake of the bloodline. Yes, Ryukin, Uryu's dad. He was supposed to marry Ichigo's mom. There's an alternative timeline in the multiverse where Masaki married Ryukin and things were very different. Ryukin's mom looks so much like Uryu, by the way. She's this very stern, rigid woman that doesn't seem easy to like, but there are hints of past trauma that may have led to her being like this. I do wish we got to see some of Uryu's grandpappy though, given we got glimpses of him before and how important he was to training Uryu later on. There's a line about Masaki and Ryukin being cousins, which threw me off a little during my read-along. Some patrons were saying that they aren't actually cousins, and it was just a cover for her on why she was living with the Ishidas, which makes sense. That could easily be the case, but other patrons were saying the opposite and that they were cousins, which would still make sense, I guess, going full Targaryen to protect the so-called purity of the Quincy bloodline. Speaking of that, we learn that there are pure blood Quincy's and those that have mixed blood, and that mixed blood Quincy's are kind of looked down upon in comparison. People like the Ishida's servant Katagiri, whose sole purpose seemed to be to follow the commands of that family. More on her later, for sure. It was just interesting that there's this dynamic within the Quincy culture, but makes complete sense given the Third Reich undertones of the Vontenreich. Things like this just make me want to punch all of them, just like how Harry Potter made me want to punch Draco Malfoy when I was a kid. It's no wonder that Hoshvalt is walking around looking like Lucius Malfoy. I'm just saying, this whole pureblood thing drives me nuts. Masaki, on the other hand, is kind of this free-spirited young woman that isn't beholden to all of the Quincy ways of thinking. She just seems much more open than any of them, and not all that invested in preserving the bloodline or whatever, and that immediately put me on her side. You live your life, girl. To hell with arranged marriages and eugenics. So we see both of Ichigo's parents in their younger days, separated in completely different worlds, living completely different lives, but bound to intersect, and that's when their worlds collide. Ishin's investigation into the missing Soul Reapers brings him down to the living world, where he tries to draw out this unseen enemy, and when it does show up, God, did things get intense quickly. I loved the build up to this, knowing that it likes to kill in the rain. The weather itself acts like the music in Jaws, letting us know that this shark is out there, ready to kill. And the image of the first Soul Reaper's sudden death was wild and brutal and scary, and been kind of burned into my mind since seeing it. It's made immediately clear that this hollow is extremely dangerous, even to a captain like Ishin. It's been a hot minute since I've been able to gush about a new hollow, so bear with me. You know how much I love these guys, okay? Just let me talk about a hollow for a sec. On his own, this experimental hollow called White is a fantastic looking character. The all black look is very striking, very unique. The blade arms are badass and dangerous, and this filled hollow hole brought another level of mystery to the whole creature. And the way he fights is different than other hollows, and at first I thought maybe we were looking at a Soul Reaper that got hollowified, and in some ways kind of, because the hollow was created using a bunch of Soul Reapers. But yeah, I thought it was like a specific Soul Reaper, maybe one of the ones that went missing. But obviously the second White is shown, it's impossible not to notice that he looks very, very familiar, because this hollow looks a whole lot like Ichigo when he was hollowified against Ukiura, and it also looked like his inner hollow during the training for the final final Getsuga Tensho, so it was instantly an intriguing design just based on the implication of how this could be connected to Ichigo in the future. That was maybe the most genius thing about this holo. It was unnerving not only because of what it was doing and how it was acting, because it had aspects we've never seen before, but was also clearly something that we've kind of seen. And the unknown connection for those few minutes was unsettling. Like, you know it's got something to do with Ichigo, but you don't know exactly how right away. The fight itself is really good, especially the atmosphere in the anime, and I love seeing Isshin look like a traditional captain in action, but I especially love the fear and desperation from him during this fight. It made the whole thing so tense, and you could feel just how serious this whole situation was. Misaki senses the battle and rushes to go investigate, but not before being stopped by Ryukin, who, like I said, he wants to protect and preserve the Quincy bloodline, protect his future wife, not because he loves her. Maybe he does love her. He's aware that his main goal for marrying this woman in the future is to preserve the Quincy bloodline. They don't see things quite eye to eye. He's much more trying to stay in line with the Quincy's and his mother's rules, and she's just not having it, because Misaki's decision to go help was, I think, one of the most defining moments for her character for me. She doesn't care about old feuds or traditions or rules or any of that. She just wants to help and can't sit by and do nothing because she knows that she would regret it later. It's very much like Ichigo, and as we see later in this arc, very much like Isshin as well. And it's a small little line of dialogue, but the fact that the Quincy wait to sense that a Soul Reaper is dead before engaging a holo at first seems a bit callous, right? But it's so telling about the seriousness of their existence at this point in the Quincy culture. They are on the brink of extinction after what the Soul Reapers did to them, so they're not going to go rushing to their aid most of the time, you know? Considering that the Soul Reapers they try to help could so quickly turn on them too, it's actually very sensible in a way given the history, but it's what makes Misaki's actions stand out even more. And it all leads to such a great moment when we see Misaki save Isshin with her arrows. It's one thing to hear that Ichigo's mom was a Quincy, but another thing entirely to actually see it, to see her wielding her bow and fighting a holo. And as I was reading this, I was thinking, man, I love the Grand Fisher, but how did she lose to him? Look at her. But we got that answer eventually too. At this point, she was powerful and badass, and the way she took out White was one of the coldest moves of the series, letting him bite her to get close, so she could blow his head off at point blank range. So incredibly badass, but was a move that inadvertently completely changed her life for a number of reasons. I loved that she saved him, and then he immediately saved her from the holo's self-destruction. They're immediately put on equal footing, both owing each other their lives after just meeting, but let's take a moment and talk about the Aizen of it all. One of the big shocks with Aizen, among the many big shocks with Aizen in the series, was that he claimed that he knew Ichigo since the moment he was born, which was a pretty peculiar thing to say. At the time, I was like, did this guy know Isshin back then? Did he know Misaki somehow? Did this man help deliver the baby in the delivery room? And while the answer is not exactly what I expected, Aizen wasn't really wrong about knowing Ichigo since the moment he was born either, from a certain point of view. So, we see Aizen in this time period, and it's always kind of strangely nostalgic seeing Aizen with the glasses on, by the way. It just takes me back to when I thought he kind of looked like my dad, before I realized Aizen was the big bad. Anyway, we learn that he was responsible for creating this strange holo, and has been monitoring its actions. It's actually really unsettling to see him, Tozen, and Gin operating under the noses of their fellow Soul Reapers in this way, so casually. And obviously we knew this was going on, and we saw a bit of it during the pendulum flashback too, but there's something so effective about going from like generally peaceful, lighthearted scenes in the Soul Society to these guys in their secret lab continuing to develop their schemes and their experimentation with holification. In the Turn Back the Pendulum arc, it felt like they were conducting all of their clandestine research in like the woods. And now they've got this high-tech lab, and we're seeing some captain robes on them, so it just feels so much more developed, you know? Still years away from revealing themselves, but much farther along than they were when they holified the Visored in that flashback. Tozen is also much more scientifically inclined than I thought he was. Like, he's all about it. But hey, I guess that makes sense since his research will lead him to eventually regaining his eyesight, at least for a few horrifying minutes. I loved when the three of them were watching White fight Ishin while wearing those cloaks that shroud them and keep them from being detected. That was a great little callback to Turn Back the Pendulum, and just another example of Aizen kind of riding on the coattails of Urahara's stuff and warping it for his own purposes. He even went so far as to attack Ishin, letting Ishin know that a Soul Reaper was responsible because he could tell that it was a Zanpakuto toe wound even if he couldn't see them. I can't imagine how scary that must have been for Ishin in that moment. You're already dealing with an extremely dangerous, weird hollow when you suddenly learn that there's at least one other Soul Reaper out there, but you can't see him, and you know that he's not there to help you. That just adds a whole other layer of panic and confusion, knowing that you're not alone and someone that should be on your team is working against you. I do feel like this realization wasn't really followed up on in the plot as much as maybe I would think it would be. Like, Ishin knew it was a Zanpakuto, and he knew that some Soul Reaper must have been there watching, but we don't see him bring it up during his report. It seems like that's maybe a pretty big deal to not mention, but maybe he didn't want to say it when the attacker could be in the room, I suppose. I do wonder if once he became friendly with Urahara, they compared notes and were like, oh yeah, it was probably the Three Musketeers. But considering he had even less evidence than Urahara since Ishin didn't even see anything really, I doubt it would have made much difference if he tried to report it. Remember, this is mild-mannered reporter Clark Kent Aizen back then. No one would believe a bad word against him. One of my absolute favorite moments during this whole attack, though, was seeing Aizen's reaction to everything that's transpiring as he's secretly watching. As we all are well aware of by now, and as I've talked about plenty of times, Aizen is a master planner that usually accounts for almost every obstacle or every outcome and calculates variables to make sure he knows how things are going to go so he can get the result he wants. But in this moment, with a Quincy girl showing up out of nowhere and interrupting his test, and her being bitten by White, I love that you can see the genuine surprise on Aizen's face. He's actually flabbergasted by something, and he's soaking it in because that probably happens so rarely. He didn't expect this, and it excites him. Just look at his face here. It's amazing to see him this way, and it's a reminder of what Aizen really is at his core. The reason he knows so many things. Sosuke Aizen is an explorer, a discoverer. He lives for daring to do things that haven't been done before, to push boundaries and find new things. He wants to be at the very top, to see what no one else has ever seen from that high up, even above the Soul King. And the Soul King was one discovery where he apparently really didn't like what he found. I just love that White biting a Quincy excites Aizen so much, to the point that when Tozen perceives White as a failure because it didn't infect the Soul Reaper, Aizen instead sees it as a success because it infected a Quincy, something that's never been done before. It was an unexpected variable, but something that then becomes a fascination for him. This is the spark of intrigue that led to his manipulation and examination of Ichigo. The beginning of Ichigo in some ways, his true conception in some ways, of that hollow power mixing with a Quincy's and eventually a Soul Reaper's. Aizen created that hollow, that same power that would live within Ichigo. He saw the moment that that power within him was truly born. And it's the beginning of Ichigo in more ways than just from Aizen's perspective, because this is also when Isshin and Masaki meet for the first time, and it's pretty momentous, and it's pretty great. There's a classic romance trope called a meet cute, which is exactly what it sounds like. Two characters meet each other for the first time in some kind of interesting way, whether it's the circumstances or the location, or the interaction itself, which is usually used to immediately show some cute or funny interplay, to set up chemistry, to make the audience want to root for these two as a couple. A young woman bumps into her future boyfriend outside of the men's bathroom, forcing her to awkwardly explain herself. Or a young man is hit by a car by the woman that would one day be his wife after she's forced to bring him to the hospital. Things like that. A classic trope used all the freaking time in all kinds of stories in all kinds of ways. But dare I say, this could be my favorite meet cute of all time. Not only because it's just a cute start between them, but it's legitimately so beautiful how both of these characters navigate this potentially extremely disastrous situation of meeting like this. Isshin has never seen a Quincy before, and Masaki has never seen a Soul Reaper. It's a moment of experiencing something new for each of them, seeing something that changes their worlds. They've come from two completely different places, belonging to factions that have gone to war with each other, tortured each other, despised each other, but here they saved each other. Isshin is obviously shocked to see a surviving Quincy, and probably especially shocked that a Quincy saved a Soul Reaper like him, all things considered. I'm sure he knows who they are, and she knows what a Soul Reaper is, at least knows that they wiped out her people, and yet she still tells him that she's a Quincy. She hesitates, she ponders if it's the right thing to do, but she can't help but be honest with him, to trust him. If this were another Soul Reaper, this could have been a fatal mistake to make. Confirming that she's a Quincy could have led to her death, or to the deaths of the Ishida family too, or could have led to all of them being tortured and experimented on by Mayuri. By revealing herself, she was potentially exposing them all. But like I said, she feels like she can say this. She feels like it's okay for her to be honest with this man that she just met. They have preconceived notions of each other, especially Masaki, because of what she's been told by Quincy about Soul Reapers. I mean, she's had to live her life knowing that Soul Reapers would try to kill them. We don't learn what happened to her family exactly that led to her living with the Ishidas, but I don't think it's outside the realm of possibilities that they were killed by Soul Reapers, Could be. And we know that Quincy's were still being killed or experimented on after this point even, because of what would happen to Uryu's grandpa years later. So it's possible, but whether that's true or not, Misaki knows that telling a Soul Reaper she's a Quincy is extremely dangerous, but she opens up to Isshin. He's even surprised that she would trust him with that information. And his response was just so heartwarming and perfect, treating her with so much kindness. This was her first impression of a Soul Reaper after actually meeting one, and he's not at all what she expected, what she had been told to expect. He's not this murderous hunter that's trying to eliminate all the Quincy. He saved her life, and he's so good to the point that she considers maybe the Quincy were wrong about Soul Reapers, or that there's hope for some kind of reconciliation. And while she's perhaps incorrect or a little too optimistic to believe that Isshin isn't just an exception to this, it's amazing that this one interaction between a Soul Reaper and a Quincy can break through so many preconceived notions and prejudices that their cultures have cultivated. That small acts of kindness can shatter all of that. I loved that so much. It brought so much to the scene. Like, it was cute seeing them help each other and smile together, but it was so much better given everything going on around them. The rest of the world and the horrible history between their cultures falls away for a moment, and they are just two people enjoying each other's company, having helped each other through a very difficult situation. And this interaction leaves a lasting impact on both of them. They're doing that classic romance thing of thinking of each other while far away, of looking into the sky, hoping to see each other again after something that should probably never happen again, that puts them both at risk or might ruin their lives back home. It's some archetypal forbidden romance beginnings going on here, and I was all for it. It was very well done. Honestly, as this story played out, one thing I was surprised by was that this isn't nearly as much of a Romeo and Juliet story as I was expecting it to be when I first found out Misaki was a Quincy. Like, yeah, that element is obviously there of two people on opposite sides falling in love, but that aspect isn't as much of a focal point as I was imagining it would be. I was thinking it was gonna be how this forbidden star-crossed love rocks both sides, and maybe their love was the cause of Isshin being cast out, or they each got kicked out of their groups, or they ran away together, but nope, it never really becomes public knowledge. It's pretty low-key, all things considered, and that actually makes a lot of sense with the rest of Bleach. If the union between a Soul Reaper and a Quincy was more known, then a lot more people would have known about Ichigo, or maybe suspected Ichigo of being a potential hybrid, or considered it, but this love story is mostly kept under wraps. The Soul Reapers don't know Ichigo's mom was a Quincy. They don't even know that Ichigo is Isshin's son, it seems like, and it never seems like, I'm not sure what they even believe by the end of the story about Isshin. Yeah, it doesn't become like the thing, you know, which was surprising, because I honestly, when I first heard this, I thought that was 100% what was going to cause even more problems between the Quincy and the Soul Reaper, was this forbidden love in the center. But a lot of that has to do with how they handled the aftermath of meeting. Isshin obviously leaves her out of his report for her own protection, which I loved. And she doesn't go running back to tell her foster family about everything either. Hell, even Ryukin, who has every reason to snitch on her, watches the interaction between her and Isshin and decides not to say anything to his mother. Young Ryu surprised me in some ways. He reminded Misaki of the rules, he understood the gravity of the situation, and yet he still was going to cover for her. Sure, it didn't end up working that way, but he wasn't always such a hard ass, which was nice to see. Ryukin isn't one of my favorite characters, and I think he's kind of very questionable as a father sometimes, but it's what happens in the last parts of this story that turns him from a little more lenient of a guy to the person we know later on in his life, after he's gone through a few personal tragedies of his own. But yeah, his maid, Katagiri, was the one to expose the truth of Misaki's meeting, but it wasn't out of spite or even because she thought it was wrong or anything. She did it for Misaki's sake, because of Misaki's injury, which turns out to be way worse than expected because of Aizen's experiments. As badass as Misaki's strategy to beat the Hollow was, it did cause her to get bit, and that transferred the Hollow's essence into her, beginning the hollification process, which was what White was designed to do, to infect. They just didn't expect that he would ever bite a Quincy. The infection affects her pretty quickly, and there's some very disturbing body horror as her hollow hole forms and pulsates, and Ryukin tries to get her help, even defying his family as he does. And then Isshin arrives to see Misaki again, having no idea about what's going on, only to find her in the middle of all of this. It's not the cute romantic kind of second meeting he was probably hoping for, but he immediately dives into the chaos, trying to help however he can, despite the fact he didn't need to. He could have gone right back home, but he cares. He legitimately cares. His small interaction with her formed a bond just right then and there. And that's when we get the first meeting between Isshin and Ryukin as well, which was interesting to see because circumstances weren't exactly ideal. You know, it's not the same as him meeting Misaki. There's already some problems happening, and he probably wouldn't have been as lenient towards a Soul Reaper to begin with. But especially now, Ryukin blames Isshin for what happened, but I liked how obvious it was that Isshin's only concern was helping Misaki. There's kind of another classic romance trope at play here between the three of them with a good old-fashioned love triangle where Misaki's supposed to marry Ryu. Ryu seems to genuinely have feelings for her, while she's interested, it seems, in Isshin, and Isshin is interested in her, so Ryukin obviously doesn't like him for that and for a variety of reasons. It's a classic. It's a classic. And the momentous introductions continue as Urahara revealed himself and brought Misaki to his shop to try to help her. For me, I was just taking all of this in because there's been this network throughout the whole series of Bleach of characters that aren't directly affiliated with the Soul Society, at least not anymore, but are in on the actual supernatural side of the world. A few exiled Soul Reapers and one of the last remaining Quincy, so it was cool seeing how they all met. To see how this kind of behind-the-scenes web of people that know each other actually started. And I liked the little detail of Isshin knowing Urahara's name. I imagine that after everything that happened in the years since Turn Back the Pendulum, Urahara is probably whispered about by other Soul Reapers as like a mad scientist or like a traitor who's out there in the living world. And I love that. I think that's fun. Urahara, being Urahara, knows a lot about holification and has some answers and possible solutions for this problem, including a way to save Misaki, but it's not the most ideal scenario, which is perfect for the drama and the tragedy, of course, but yeah, essentially, Misaki needs to be tied to an opposing power to what's happening inside of her, to keep her from succumbing to the infection of the Hollow, but the only thing that could possibly provide what she needs is a powerful Soul Reaper in the body of a human, and the only real candidate on hand is Isshin. To do this, he would have to live within a Gigai and be with Misaki until, for the rest of her life, to keep her in check and to keep this Hollow from taking over and harming her. The power would also pass down to her possible children as well in the future, and obviously that's how this happens, but yeah, I finally learned why Isshin didn't have his Soul Reaper powers at the beginning of the series, but I was even more wowed by how he agreed to this. Because he's giving up his position, his power, his life, his family, his home, everything that he knew is gonna be gone. So even Ryu is like, there's no way this Soul Reaper guy is gonna agree to this because there's no benefits for him really, at least none that Ryu could see. But Isshin, without a moment of hesitation, just zero hesitation, agrees. He agrees to do this, to give up everything for her, to sacrifice everything to keep Misaki alive. Like I said, he's giving up everything he knows to help someone he just met. It's not that he's like, oh, I'm already madly in love with her. At least he doesn't vocalize that. But no, it simply felt like he wanted to help her. He wanted to keep her alive. And that's something that their eventual son would do. It was exactly like Ichigo, just throwing himself into something that wouldn't benefit him if it means protecting someone he cares about. It was amazing, and I adored that decision and just the way Isshin did that. And it led to one of my favorite scenes of this entire flashback, which was Isshin's power coming to prevent the Hollow from taking Misaki within her. And it was just this beautiful, abstract, surreal kind of moment where he comes to her aid and pretty much tells the Hollow, you're not going to get her while I'm around. And it was touching and very just pretty much the most intimate you could get, like two souls joining together to fend off something that's bad for them. I loved it. And it had this air of like eventual dread, because you know that this power isn't going away and it will be a problem in the future. But in this moment, he saved her life. He gave away everything to make that happen. And it was beautiful that apparently he never told her that he did all of this intentionally to save her. He told her like he got kicked out of the Soul Society. He just made up a story, but he said that she never really believed him. It became kind of a game where he would lie and she would, act like she believed the lie. It was all beautiful. It was just really beautiful and I loved it so much. And obviously this whole flashback was centered around Misaki and Isshin and what led to their union, but there was a whole other story of finding love within all of this that really took me by surprise, and that was the relationship between Ryuken and his family's servant Katagiri, who it turns out, and I figured this out as we were reading, she ends up being Uryu's mom in the future. That itself didn't surprise me really, but seeing how much attention it was kind of given, it was like this running subplot throughout Everything But the Rain. Then this natural evolution from servant and protector to someone that Ryuken really respects and understands by the end, as she's the one person showing him so much unconditional love no matter what he decides and what he does with his life. It was touching to see how she was going to stand by him at his lowest, a real sign of love. And as someone in the middle of an arranged marriage, it was interesting to see him actually find love with someone his family would definitely not approve, and I'm sure they didn't approve of him falling in love with her. Yeah, it was just an incredible flashback that gave me exactly what I needed, and as the flashback itself ends, we're still given more of this story. Because Isshin keeps talking. We're kind of taken into a monologue as Isshin keeps telling this story and what happened after this big event that brought the two of them together, what led to Ichigo and the family. And I teared up both while reading and watching this when Isshin was kind of recapping their life together. It hit me really hard for a few reasons. Obviously, like the rest of this did, it circled everything back to memories in the rain. But even more specific things really got me. The writing itself was so poetic and touching, and it culminated with Isshin talking about Misaki being like the sun. First off, it was an echo of Ichigo's perception of Misaki back in Memories in the Rain. He described her as the center of his family's universe, and losing her kind of sent everything out of orbit. That line back then hit me a lot because that's how it felt when my own mother passed, and this calling back to that with how Isshin saw her similarly was really beautiful because it's so clear how much Masaki's family loved her, and to have built that family after having lost her original one and have him having lost his original one is just so beautiful and heartbreaking, knowing that they're having to live without her. And as someone that is married and been through a lot with my wife, where she's remained this fixed point of a great thing in my life, I really felt everything Isshin was saying. I've also coincidentally had my wife listed as Sunshine in my phone for years because I too have often compared her to the sun since early on in our relationship. One of the first things she ever gave me was a bracelet she made that represents the stars, the moon, and the sun is the part on the bracelet that sticks out the most. So through sheer coincidence, or maybe fate, I don't know, this destroyed me because I was putting myself in Isshin's position just naturally. Also, we go to the movies all the time, so the fact they were at the movies when he had this realization and she was crying at the movies, it all felt very close to home for me. In like ridiculous ways, and I couldn't really believe what I was reading, and it was hitting so hard because it's so true, it's so real, it's so human, it's so beautiful, and it's romantic, and it was just incredible. Really, I loved it so much. This whole thing was absolutely incredible. When the flashback and the monologue ended, I thought that would be it, that the information we were given was all we were going to get from that span of time. But then Isshin kept talking and got into what really happened on that fateful June 17th, 9 years ago. What really happened the day Misaki died. One of the biggest questions that naturally comes up when first hearing that Misaki was a Quincy is, why didn't she fight back against the Grand Fisher? How could she lose to the Grand Fisher? And the answer to that is its own kind of tragedy. We learn that Yuabaha isn't just the Quincy King. He's the original, the one that they all came from, and that they are all connected to him. There's a bit of a master vampire thing going on with them, it turns out, and he was able to restore his power by siphoning and stealing the power from other Quincy's in this big consecration ritual. Particularly, he took the power from ones that he deemed unworthy. So it seems like mixed blood individuals, or Quincy's tainted by hollows like Misaki, weren't deemed worthy, and they lost their Quincy ability. abilities. And unfortunately for Misaki, her Quincy powers were gone when she was trying to save her son from the Grand Fissure. Typically, her Blute probably could have protected her and she could have taken him out with an arrow or something, but without those powers, she was suddenly exposed, suddenly vulnerable. The Grand Fissure was able to kill her because of her powers being taken by Yuabaha, regaining his strength. So in a way, Yuabaha, it turns out, is really responsible for Misaki's death. And the really tough part about this is that Isshin could have gone to help her. He sensed that she was being attacked, and he said he could have gone, and he just chose not to. He would have, even if he didn't have his abilities. Like, he was pretty vulnerable, but he said he would have gone. But he thought she had it handled, because she usually would have. This would have been fine. Her powers would have been enough to easily defeat the Grand Fissure, but on this day in particular, that didn't happen. And I can't imagine Isshin's guilt after hearing all this and knowing how much he cared about her and how much she meant to him. His guilt of how he decided not to go try to help. He thought everything was going to be okay because Misaki was more powerful than him at this point, but he would have gone if he thought she was in any real danger, but usually she wouldn't have been. If this had been any other day before this one, she would have easily won and she would have survived. And I'm sure he repeats that over and over to himself, that he should have gone, he should have been there, but he chose not to be because she should have been fine. If he had attacked the day before this one, Misaki would have lived, but that's not how it panned out. The timing is kind of suspect for me, like that she just so happened to lose her power right as she's fighting a hollow. Maybe it's just fate or something, I'm not sure how far Yuabaha's selection extends when he was taking their powers for himself. Could he see what was happening to them at the time? Or was he just crossing names off a list? I don't know how deep that Quincy connection goes really, but it was a bit peculiar that, she was at such a vulnerable moment right as that happened. I don't know if someone premeditated that someone send the Grand Fissure. Was Aizen involved with that as well? I don't know. It did seem a little convenient that that was the moment, when she needed her powers most, when she probably seemed to be living a pretty normal life until that moment, her powers were gone. Misaki wasn't the only Quincy that fell prey to Yuabaha's return, though. Uryu's mom, who obviously turned out to be Katagiri, also lost her powers on June 17th, and she fell ill without them and ended up dying a few months later. And because she was a half-blood Quincy, or mixed blood Quincy, Yuabaha took her powers from her as well, and that ended up leading to her death. The thing that came to my mind, though, and that I've been thinking about a bit, is that if Yuabaha was cleansing the Quincy of all the mixed blood or tainted blood, whatever, that he didn't deem pure, why didn't he do the same to Uryu? Considering who his mother is, he would be considered mixed blood, wouldn't he? Like, yes, he's part of the Ishida clan, but they made it very clear that who they have kids with is important for their ideals of preserving the bloodline. So I'm surprised that Uryu didn't lose his power. Ryukin makes sense, even though he doesn't seem directly involved with the Vandenreich. He is a pureblood Quincy, but his son is not. So what's up with that? And Ichigo is technically a Quincy, and his power was dormant and stuff, but why wasn't his power taken by the ritual? I don't know. Lots of questions. The Vandenreich history is one thing that this extensive flashback does not dive into. We still don't know where they've really been, or how they've survived for so long, or any of that, but it's made clear that Yuabaha weeded out anyone that he didn't deem worthy, but then at the same time has been gifting Arrancar's hollow powers, which feels like it would be frowned upon even more than mixed blood Quincy's, but I don't know. I'm just excited to learn more about the specifics of what's happening with the Quincy's and the specifics of Yuabaha's survival and return after this, because what the hell? These manga chapters did show Uryu joining him, but I think I'll get more into that next video since it was just kind of a tease. But with what happened to his mom, he might have good reason to hate the Quincy King if he knows the truth. And with that, we got all the information that Ichigo wanted and needed, and the information that I wanted and needed, and it was satisfying. Everything but the rain was beautiful absolutely beautiful, an incredible lore drop on one hand, but on the other hand, outside of all the answers it gave, it was just this snippet of a love story. It might sound strange, but this was incredibly romantic without having much actual romance in the traditional sense. There was no kiss, there was no declaration of love, and not even much flirting on screen. Hell, Isshin and Masaki barely had any scenes together outside of the incredibly effective first meeting, and yet the bond and the instant connection they shared was palpable because these two people cared deeply about others. Just like their son, they cared about protecting people. Love isn't always kisses or romantic getaways. It's often about sacrifice, compromise, doing whatever you can to help someone you care about. And sometimes true romance isn't a grand proclamation of epic proportions, but instead a quiet, natural shift into a life where you found a partner and happiness in something simpler than what you had before. And that's what this showed us. This beautiful love that came from a very unexpected place and led to even more unexpected places. I'm glad I got so many answers I've been waiting for, and I'm glad that it was revealed in such a poetic story that brought Bleach and Ichigo back to the roots of what made me love it to begin with. It was a reminder of just how deeply emotional this shonen story can be. It's about life and death and everything that happens in between. I pondered at the beginning of this video what the title of this flashback arc meant, and I had a few possibilities, but as I've been editing this video and working on this video for like 2 weeks, almost 3 weeks at this point, I've come to a different possible conclusion, and I think it might be the one that I actually like best, and that is that everything but the rain might be referring to Masaki herself, or maybe the love that the people around her had for her, because Masaki, obviously, as we talked about, was referred to as the sun, and that was very impactful and obviously very important in the way that her husband and her child viewed her. And Isshin met Masaki on a rainy night where they fought a hollow together, saved each other from a monster that was specifically tied to rain, who would only kill during rainy nights for whatever reason. The genesis of their love and of Ichigo began on a rainy night. She ended the rain, quote unquote, for a while, but eventually it came back and it snuffed out the sun, and since then, rain, has very much applied to Ichigo and his hard times. But to the people that loved her, Masaki was kind, she was heroic, she was caring, she was inspiring, she was bright and beautiful, she was the sun, she was everything. Everything but the rain. Whew, thank you so much for watching, guys, and sticking with me through this. I know it was a long video, but obviously I had a lot of thoughts, and thank you for the patience as I've been working on it. And yeah, this was a lot, and I loved it. I just feel so fulfilled in knowing this whole unknown section of the story just filled in what I needed it to fill in. So yeah, as always, thanks for watching. Please comment, like, subscribe. If you want to see more content, I have the manga read-along and anime reactions on Patreon, including my initial read-along of Everything But the Rain and my reaction to the 2-part episode. So if you want to see even more thoughts, if an hour wasn't enough for you, there's, way more. Hope you all have a great day. I'll see you soon. Take care. Bye.